Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Brilliant. Hi. I'm so sorry this had to be rescheduled. I'm not doing a great deal better today. We're having some sort of bomb drill in Downing Street, so I've had to run over to Cabinet Office, and I don't really have a decent tech setup here. So if this sound goes or you can't see or hear anything, could you do me a favour and just shout?
Yeah.
Otherwise,
Thanks,
brilliant.
Laura.
Thanks so much. Thank you very much. I think I might just kick off then. This is going to be relatively informal. It seems to be quite an informal sort of set of data chats. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about things I've done in data and my views on it. And do feel very free to drop sort of questions in the chat, and I'll try and leave a little bit of time at the end to talk to anyone that wants to ask things. But meanwhile, I'll kick off with a couple of slides. So here we go. The first hurdle, can I share a presentation? Any second now. Okay, can you see a screen?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks ever so much. So I am the Director of Data Science in Downing Street. For anybody that doesn't know me, I also am Joint Chief Analyst in Cabinet Office. And the team that I run is 10DS, the 10 Data Science team in Downing Street. And I also run a team called I.AI, which is a software development group, 10 people sort of doing rapid prototyping. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the work we do basically here. Why are we doing it? Because we'd really like evidence-based policymaking. But more than that, we think that having good data and better yet, a really good understanding of how to use data and evidence makes for better decisions in the round. Anyone who's been to my civil service live talks will know by now that we think we make about 35,000 decisions a day, and not only presenting people with good data and evidence for really key decisions that government makes, but also sort of training and upskilling them in how to look for information, how to interpret information, how to use it to make good decisions is really powerful as a way to improve the way that government operates. So I'm going to tell you a tiny bit about myself in this one, because it's quite a small group chat. I live out in Hampshire. I have a garden full of mongooses. There's one of them. And I've always been very interested in data. I was originally, my first job out of university was in the Ministry of Defence and Defence Intelligence. I did that for a little bit less than a year, and then went back to university. I was a particle physicist for nearly 8 years and taught physics to undergraduates. I then spent nearly 3 years in quantitative finance, where I learned many interesting things, including my first experience really of building AI algorithms. So we were building genetic algorithms where you sort of try and create algorithms that breed with each other and sort of generate new versions of themselves, and then you run them through a data environment. So we're looking at high frequency training, particularly, over recent history, and see which ones are most successful. And then you keep the winners and breed them again, and you hope you end up with an algorithm that outperforms everybody else on the market. Absolutely technically fascinating, doesn't work at all. The future is not very similar to the past when it comes to high frequency trading, and other people are running other algorithms that tend to fight against you, but it's technically fascinating. So I then sort of came to the conclusion quite quickly that whilst the technical side was interesting and I learned, my programming got a lot better, it just wasn't very motivating. I wasn't excited about making money for people that already had a lot of money. And so I left and joined a tech startup called Rescon. I was the second person on board and sort of built it up from startup to acquisition. And this was one of my first visualizations. Horrible, isn't it? Seemed like a good idea at the time. This one at the top with the symptoms particularly holds huge amounts of statistical data in very vibrant colours, completely not understandable in any way. So it contains all the information you might need to know, and yet at the same time doesn't communicate much of any sort. So very quickly got wise to that. This is a little bit of a segue while we're still spinning up. It was an occasion when I'd managed to overcome a huge tech hurdle, and whenever I talk about Rescon, I like to show this. So after I'd spent a week trying to hack my way around a horrible and difficult to understand networking issue to try and make one of the sort of first live GP chats, and I finally got the thing working about 3 a.m. on a Friday. Called up my lead developer, and he answered his video looking like that. And yeah, it was a pivotal moment in my career. After that, we sort of got better. We went through, building Android apps, etc. on the left, and quite quickly learned how to make something that was an acceptable user interface, if rather pink and purple, that gave you the information you actually wanted. Alongside that, we also did huge amounts of scientific research. So I built sort of one of the first, well, probably the first algorithm that detected heart rates in people in real time and could sort of display them to you so you could diagnose problems with them, and built a visualization that helped people to uncover sort of cycles in malaria parasites so they could build drugs that would interrupt them. And after 10 years, sold the company and needed another job. And I sort of ended up here in Downing Street. So 10DS at that point already had about 4 very, very good data scientists, and they were looking to obviously expand. And I interviewed for the director job, and really didn't think I'd want it, but once I had interviewed and been offered it, I realised that I did. So I joined in September 2020. And the history of the team's creation was probably quite interesting. Much like many companies and much of government, COVID forced a digital transformation. Transformation is a word I'm always quite uncomfortable with, because by the time you need a transformation, generally you've done something wrong. You haven't kept up with the state of the art. You're behind the times. You need to transform. And COVID showed an awful lot of us that we needed to transform the way we did things. So the timeline in September, in 2020, 29th of January, I'm sure you remember really well, the first 2 patients tested positive for COVID in the UK. And the next day, the World Health Organization declared a global health emergency. 16th of March, a full national lockdown had been going for some time, but the virus continued to spread, and outbreaks were sort of rife in care homes. The proportion of people that died in care homes is already about 10% higher than the general population of the same sort of demographic, because of course there's a reason they're in the care homes in the first place. But it shot up radically higher, and at this point in May, we were looking at care home deaths that were higher than hospital deaths for the first time, and the cases were rising and rising. And of course, people knew why that was. Really, a lot of people had a good idea. But it's difficult to make policy, I think, when you have a good idea, particularly when that policy might be unpopular and might be sort of threatening to people's livelihoods or ability to operate in difficult circumstances. So around this point, number 10, before I joined in the Civil Contingency Service, working with the CQC, Care Quality Commission, on a programme to try and get daily data for COVID testing and deaths, and automate those data flows and try and link it up with staffing data across regions. And the hypothesis was really that one of the reasons that care home deaths were going up so much when people weren't really allowed to go and see their relatives was, of course, staff moving around, because an awful lot of care homes are using staff who are bank staff and might move between environments. So once this work was done, they were able to do this internal analysis of staffing patterns, and that showed about 56% of the care homes that reported their first COVID case were relying on agency staff that had recently worked in another care home with active cases, which is a good clue, not 100% of the story. But even then, just that analysis wasn't really enough to change the way things were done. And so PHE started to genomically sequence the varieties of COVID that were being found in London, and followed up those sort of chains of transmission and confirmed that they were the same sort of genetic strains that were moving between care homes, which is what it took for the DHSC to then draft new guidelines to sort of minimise the movement of staff between care homes. So that all happened within about a month, really, which is very impressive. But it took another 2 weeks to publish that work. And in those 2 weeks, a lot more people contracted COVID and a lot more people died as a result. So we still had sort of a huge debt in terms of being able to get data, being able to analyze it, but also be able to convince people that it's right, even in a crisis. And that was really why the decision was made to create a number 10 data science team, so that hopefully that sort of thing would be much quicker and easier in future. So what do we do? Obviously, evidence-based decisions, and not just in terms of putting dashboards in front of the Prime Minister and giving him information about what options he might be able to take in order to reach the outcomes he wants, although it's a very large part of it, and I'll show a few quick examples of that. It's also things like, having a good understanding of what evidence tells us about how to make policy and even make decisions. For example, if you're trying to launch a very challenging policy, running a pre-mortem effectively can increase your chances of that programme not failing by about 30%. So we try and keep our finger on the pulse of evidence-based interventions in the round and not just data and dashboards. So that's one thing. Another one is building a better customer. We try to, when we're doing our work, teach people as we go so that they know where to go next time they need information, they know what questions to ask, they're perhaps more receptive to the idea of relying on data and evidence. And when I first joined, we used to find quite often that, we'd be targeting what we thought was an important decision. We go and we find really interesting data, and then we perhaps pitch up to the policy or delivery teams and say, we've got some data about your thing, we can help you deliver a better outcome. And quite often people would say, oh, that's terrific, let's have a look, or come and engage with us and help us build it. But quite often people would say, no, we're already the experts, we don't really need your help. And of course we know that overconfidence is one of the major pitfalls in decision making, and particularly prevalent probably in central government. So trying to teach people and guide them in the direction of cross-checking their preconceived and sort of learned notions when they're building a new program starts to become incredibly important. And then we do this thing called targeted interventions, where we are looking to use up about 20% of our time, really, on individual high impact projects that we think will change government in some meaningfully useful way. And those tend to be deliberately quite high risk, and we run them with the idea that we will kill them off quickly if we don't think they're succeeding and go and do something else. And I'll talk to you about a few of those programs as well. So the evidence-based decisions, the main thing 80% of the time is that we need to get something up in front of the Prime Minister or somebody else, who's going to make a major decision. We're not going to tell them how to make the decision. We are going to try and highlight to them, if you choose this range of options, we think it will get you close to your outcomes. And, if you choose this range of options, it won't. And sort of draw their eye to what you might think was the most sensible suite of options, but at the same time, it's not our job to make that decision for them. So we present, our best assessment of policy suggestions or, the space they're operating in at any point. We are not able to wait a long time to get every piece of information. So we've had to get very, very good at pulling together anything we can, the best estimates where we don't have anything, based on where somebody's done something similar and there's some evidence around that, or, where we've got ropey data, put some big uncertainty bars on it and try and communicate the uncertainty of it. But we do need to do it quickly. And the usual turnaround at the moment for a new dashboard in this team would be about a week. But if it's an emergency, we can turn something around in 24 hours, which we did for the Afghan resettlement, to figure out where everybody was and where we thought we could put them in the country. So we can go very quickly indeed, and we can deploy a new dashboard in about 6 minutes now, thank you to our wonderful engineering team. So these are slightly older ones. I'll show you something new in a minute, but it's just examples of where, obviously I'm not going to show particularly live issues, but where we've just pulled together information and tried to figure out, for a decision maker, if you make these choices, what will be the net impact? In this case, it's the sort of cost of living household explorer. And you can check, if I make all of these different policy choices, I make some assumptions about inflation, how will my policies impact the average couple with children, single people, retired people, etc., and go through those sorts of modelling scenarios in order that the policymakers can discuss the options with information in front of them. Another one I really liked from the early days was this HS2 Explorer. And it was based on a very complicated, very detailed and very accurate, I think, slide pack from DFT, which talked about the various options that you could purchase and sort of made recommendations. But it was incredibly difficult to wade through, and we sort of thought the Prime Minister might struggle with it, the Prime Minister at the time. As in fact a normal human would, with lots of tables if they're busy and probably quite tired. So we put it into this 3-page dashboard where each page was a decision, and you can click on, the different things that you're building, and then on the right it will give you an idea of improvements to journey time, which was the main sort of outcome metric, an assessment of the value for money, which is obviously really quite broad because there's not a very good way to assess that. And then, idea of when your benefits are being delivered. And you could go through and do that for the 3 decisions, add it to your Amazon shopping basket, and on the last tab when you'd finished, it would show you what you were spending and what on, which I remain firmly convinced is the way that we should do all spending reviews, Amazon style. This was my favourite visualization and remains so. This was the Net Zero Policy Explorer, which is a huge piece of work, running to many pages, charts and tables. But it was possible to play if you chose certain policy options from the world we're in roughly now, 2020, where grey is, non-renewable energy, and how it sort of works through our energy infrastructure, through to if you chose the right policies and were able to hit your targets, what the energy flows would look like in 2050. I just thought that was a very detailed and beautiful piece of work, and it can really see you visualizing longer term outcomes that it's quite hard to get your head around. I think when we work to quite short time horizons a lot of the time. Currently, the dashboard looks like this. You can see it's modernized a lot since those ones actually a year or sometimes 2 years ago. And it's very interactive, quite simple. The front page focuses on the main priorities. We've then got up to 300 live dashboards behind it where you can zoom in on particular issues, and it will draw your attention to what we think people are most interested in. We also do things on the tech side, like, the sort of follow through tracking to see where people navigate on the dashboard and try and optimize the user experience. So things have become a lot more industry standard since the early days where we throw up dashboards and just talk to them. But one thing we will do is, this is live and available to anyone in Downing Street or Cabinet Office, data.number10.gov.uk. We will always talk people through, and the person that will go and talk people through in a meeting is the person that's done the work. So the expert analyst will be in the room ready to answer any questions and make sure that people, really understand the uncertainties and can answer any questions about the data and what the assumptions are on any models. We don't just leave people to sort of guess from these various charts. So that's where we are at the moment. We're very much in a space of showing rather than telling, and we look to drive demand because we like the rest of government to also have these sort of robust data flows. And in a lot of cases, I think we do pieces of work like this that ideally departments would be able to do themselves, would have the skills and data sharing infrastructure to be able to do, and we wouldn't have to do it anymore. So there's something quite valuable when we go and show ministers and permanent secretaries pieces of work that look quite modern and allow them to really explore their area of interest, because they then go back to their departments and say, well, how can we do this? There's another point about the data dashboards as well, which is one of framing. And it's not always the case that a live and interactive dashboard is the best way to show data. It definitely isn't, and we are not fully committed to that as a model. But there's some interesting psychological research that shows that basically if you are surrounding yourself with non-rational information, so if you're looking at a lot of information about sort of aromatherapy, let's say, and homeopathy, lovely pictures of candles, people tend to make relatively unrational decisions. If you show people a bunch of charts and numbers in particular, even if those numbers are utterly unrelated to the thing they're looking at, those people will still make a measurably more rational decision than they would have done otherwise. So, along with concepts such as loss aversion, if you frame things where you say, well, if you do this, you will have that, and the person psychologically thinks they have it, and the next thing you offer them suggests they don't have it anymore, people respond twice as badly to losing the same amount, basically, as they respond positively to winning that amount. People hate to lose. So you have to be very careful when you go through and present your data and your evidence that the framing itself and the way you present it has huge impact in the outcome of the kind of decisions that you're looking at. So we have to be very responsible and really think about the way that we talk to people. There's other pieces of work in there. There are a lot of cognitive biases that come to play that you have to be aware of and make sure that you're trying to, work around and negate as much as possible. And of course, people want different things called the utility. The value of something is not numeric in the way that we think it is. So, for some people, £10 billion spent on something is a huge amount of money, and they might contextualize it compared to the average person's tax. For another person, it's something you can throw away and not worry about too much in the context of government. So people are coming, with inbuilt preferences and backgrounds that mean that they will view the same decision very, very differently. And it's really important for us to be fully aware of that sort of thing. So moving on, I'm going to talk to you on that note very, very quickly about AI. We do a lot of AI upskilling. We're running a big AI program in 10DS that's particularly keen to deliver AI into public services. And I think a lot of people are really struggling to understand what it is and how we can do it in government. And we've got a lovely hour-long upskilling called the Bluffer's Guide to AI, and this is my favourite diagram from it. And I'm going to tell you what this is for those that don't already know, and if you do, please humour me. Just check your email for a minute. So this aims to explain how generative AI works, and I find it genuinely fascinating. On the left, you've got a picture of a cat. We use something called a neural network. If you want to understand what that is, come to the Bluffer's Guide. And what the neural network basically does is it knows what the cat looks like. And it's what it's going to do is we're going to take that cat picture, we're going to mix up all the pixels, as you're working across towards the right, until it looks like noise. It just looks like static on a page. And you put that into one side of the neural network, and you also put the original cat, and you get it to try and guess how to rearrange the pixels so it looks like the cat. And the first hundreds, thousands of times, it will do a terrible, terrible job. But it compares it to the original cat, and it gives itself a score, and it works out how to do it better. And as it cycles through that process over and over again, giving itself feedback on whether or not it's getting closer, it will do that better and better until eventually it will recreate something very close to the original cat. And it will pass the threshold and it will say done. And you give it another cat and it carries on. And it does over and over and over and over again, cat after cat after cat after cat. If you then give it something that is totally randomly generated noise that hasn't been mixed up from an original picture of a cat, and you just say, make a cat, it will follow the same process it's learned to do, and it will create a cat. And it won't be an originally input cat. It will be a brand new cat generated from random noise. And it's phenomenally effective. And it's the same sort of process that we use with these large language models. And people tend to think that what they're looking at is something where it's, almost researched reference and is pulling out references. It's not at all. It is trained time and time and time again on make me an essay in this style to recreate something that looks close enough. And what you're doing in this case is giving it something which is the prompt that tells it what it's looking for, a cat. And then you give it some static and off it goes. And that is why we, amongst other things, it's quite complicated, obviously, but that is why, we tend to get these blips where you get something called a hallucination. It's not the model's wrong, it's that it was never created to be right. It was created to learn to make a cat out of noise. And as far as it's concerned, this looks like a cat because it mimics closely, a real human piece of text. I find that fascinating. Anyway, that's as an aside. Moving on, because I've realised that I was slightly late. So we do this other piece of work called targeted interventions, where we spend about 20% of the time, as I mentioned, trying to make change in government. And there are three things I'd like to tell you about very quickly. The first is Project Rapid, the first one we did in this space. We were aware that lots of government departments really struggle with data sharing. They're still emailing. One case, we still get a JPEG image of a table sent in on a regular basis that you have to transcribe or screen grab. And we really wanted to make that better. And we knew that other central groups weren't really creating this kind of infrastructure. So we've made a free, lightweight, open source, so free to the public, security tested API, which is a data sharing system that you can just install on any sort of cloud environment, and you can use it for data sharing. So instead of emailing everyone your data, you can drag and drop or enter the data. You can code into it, but there's also a no code version for people who aren't analytical to just drop their information in. And then everyone around government that you want to share it with can basically subscribe and get your live data updates. It's running in 12 departments now, and it's starting to gain interest sort of outside of the government space as well, which I think is fantastic. And I've been very excited about that as being a very low cost intervention to help government overcome some of these data sharing problems, and we'll go in and help support it with departments that are using it. I.AI is our software development team. They develop what we call minimum viable products, MVPs. And it's to sort of answer the problem that if you want a piece of tech just built, if you want an app, if you want a website, etc., unless it's really quite high priority, you're going to need to get usually quite a lot of funding, go out and hire a consultancy company. We see that happening across government. And the spend can easily be hundreds, even thousands of times bigger than what it's really worth and what you could do yourself. So these 10 people are trying to show that we can do this kind of development in-house. They built the One Big Thing sort of website and evaluation platform, if you've seen that, in about 8 weeks, which is pretty good with user testing and quite a challenging subject matter and integrating with all the departments needed sort of discussion. They supported DESNES in building their what was their help to heat and is now their sort of eligibility checker for assistance with heating, speeding them up from originally a 3-year timeline to sort of getting a beta test out in a matter of months. And a number of other projects where they've just sort of stepped in and built something that otherwise you either would have had to spend a lot of money and spend a lot of time building, or just wouldn't have been able to do at all. So I'm very pleased with that as a paradigm. I think we could use more teams like that can just build you an app. You need an app, we'll build you one. And then finally, Evidence House, which is the thing I'm most proud of in government. And this is bringing people together to try and solve big problems in data collaboratively. We've got about, I'm going to skip ahead to this, we've got about 700 people signed up for this program. They've all skills assessed themselves. We kicked off in January, so we've got an idea of what skills they have. They come on boot camps, so you can come for a day and learn to code in Python or do program evaluation or communicate evidence with impact. And the other thing we do is we have 3-day hackathons, and we try and solve the sorts of problems you can see on your page. Our maternal and newborn safety AI work was announced a few weeks ago, which is really exciting. Some teams built some sort of public-facing solutions to high-volume fraud, so catching fraudulent companies and helping people avoid phishing scams. We're working with DWP to try and enhance their benefits fraud. And there was a terrific hack a couple of months ago working with OpenAI, Anthropic, Google and Microsoft. And that one resulted in the winning team creating a digital red box, which is one of the best things I've ever seen. The idea is if you work in a private office, then you can read in a paper that comes into you. It will not only summarize it, it will go through the minister's box, flag every time he's received a similar submission on a timeline, every time he's given a speech that's sort of related, and it will synthesize what it thinks the minister's view is going to be. And that, I believe, will turn into an institutional memory machine for government. So if you're interested in coming and working a bit more in data and trying to solve really big problems, learn a bit about AI, then join us with Evidence House. You can literally Google it and come and join in, and you can help us use AI to solve problems. You don't need loads of expertise, you just need good ideas. I'm going to stop there because I'm running out of time. In fact, I am out of time. But if anyone wants to ask a very quick question, shout, and otherwise feel free to email me. And thank you for your time. I'm having a quick look in the chat. Yes, I'm sorry, that screenshot for GDP was the middle of last week, which is when I thought I was doing this talk, obviously. The software for the visualizations, we use Plotly Dash for most of them, but we're moving on to Angular. So it's coded in-house, but it's standardized programming languages. The Amazon's shopping basket, I think, is, fantastic, and we need to work that idea up more. And then there's a feedback survey that's been dropped in by Rachel. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you so much. Yes, the resilience is a really great, I'm dropping my email in the chat because you can email me so long as you don't expect a very, very fast reply. I will respond to you when I get time. So how do you stay resilient? Most of the topics we look at are things that we're very interested in and where we can help. Things where it comes to really difficult topics are still things where we can help, and us being there will lead to better outcomes than if we're not. I think it really does become difficult when things are quite contentious along the lines of, for example, migration. But I think we're very anxious to help as much as we can, and we get real sense of worth and value from doing our best to make sure these policies are effective as possible, really. What are the most important cognitive biases? Come to one big conference on the 20th of November, and I will tell you all about them. I've got an hour talk in this area. The presentation, yes. So come. I'm going to write down one big conference, 20th of November. It's an entire day. It'll be on the internet fairly soon, and it will fill in your 7 hours of one big thing, data literacy learning. So come along and you can hear about what we're doing in slower time. You can build your own dashboard if you are that way inclined. You can learn all about AI and come and join us in a hack. I'm going to let you go, and thank you very much indeed for listening to me. Lovely to see you all.